Coming on from a different hat, I'm talking as an independent consultant in destination branding, tourism product development and marketing with a focus on Africa. And I come from a perspective that's both public sector and private sector. So hopefully I can give you some sort of type of insight into how we can create this growth of African tourism. And what can we do as members of this forum? Because really, there's so many different areas that we need to work towards to create Africa on the move. And if I take from Jillian's comment yesterday, advocacy is something we can do from this forum. We need to take our advocacy for intra-African travel and make sure that governments know the importance of it. We need to integrate inter-African travel into your business model. And primarily, we need to own intra-African travel. We need to own it and make it our own. We need to travel within Africa, within all our different countries. So, this is the current reality. I know there was a lot of discussions about figures, but figures are important. We know that travel and tourism contributed to 8.1% of GDP, and it supported 6.5% of jobs in Africa. Yet, there's a problem. Africa only receives 3% of arrivals and 5% of revenue. It's not enough. Yet, if you look at the World Economic Forum in sub-Saharan Africa, there's 13% of the world's population are there, and in 2030, it'll be 17% of the population. And the question is, how do we decipher the demographic capital? How do we take that capital and turn it into a positive? My feeling is, if we harness this growth, we're going to see that figure of 3% grow at least by another 1. And in terms of jobs, currently 1 in 10 jobs are in tourism. We know we talked about jobs and quality of jobs, but the reality is, in a high unemployment rate, we need to create jobs. The WTTC said that 1 in 4 new jobs will be in tourism. But there's a problem. If we're going to create thought leadership in intra-African travel, we need to understand the statistics. And unfortunately, there isn't that many. We know that in South Africa, we heard that 74.4% of tourism in South Africa comes from within the African continent. But what about all other 53 countries? We don't have precise statistics, and maybe coming from this forum, we need to start thinking about intra-African statistics. What are the total number of arrivals from Africa into Africa? Which countries or cities receive the most African travel? Which residents of Africa are traveling from and to? Once we understand those statistics, we can understand how we move forward to create this development. The African Union's Agenda of 2063 aims to create growth, and they're hoping to double intra-African tourism by 2023. That's a challenge. We've moved far. We have that free movement of persons of protocol. We have the single air African transport. We're looking at the African continent's free trade area, but it's not enough. And during the discussions, we're going to talk about visas, we're going to talk about air. But I think something was very resounding yesterday. There was a lovely lady who spoke. She said she was only 21. I see her in the audience there. And she said something amazing. She said when she finished school, when she thought about tourism, it was traveling to Paris. It was traveling to America. And if we're going to change the narrative of intra-African tourism, possibly we need to start talking about intra-African tourism in our schools and change that. Today we're going to talk about many areas of opportunity, and I'm looking purposely at opportunities. These aren't challenges. We can work towards changing them. At the moment, Africa has 15% of the world's population, but only 4% of global scheduled seats. Luckily, the good news is it's improving by 6% year on year, with stars like Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. And I just read Uganda today has relaunched their national airline. But at the moment, most airline carriers are foreign-dominated. We need to work on costing. The World Bank studies show that in the region, 50% higher than every other region. We need to work on small airlines. The reality is, if you can't move from region to region on a small, short-haul airline, how are you going to move? How are we going to route inter-Africa travel? We need to work on our roads. There's a few positive examples. For example, Namibia, who has examples of good road networks, consistent investment and infrastructure. And they're winning. Self-drives in Namibia on the up year on year. We need to look at our airports. Airports, privatization of airports. At the moment, of the 5 hubs for the African continent, 3 are outside of Africa. Does anyone know where the 3 are? Dubai, London, Paris. Those are our hubs that service Africa. This needs to change. We need to look towards the ASEAN model, how they created an ASEAN intra-ASEAN tourism market. They focused on creating those opportunities within the ASEAN market. 74% of their travelers comes from within that market. We're going to talk about visa openness, and there's the African Visa Openness Report that's published by the African Union. Right now, and I think Jillian will talk about this, Africans don't need a visa to travel to 25% of other African countries. And that might seem a little, but it's better than it was. In 2017, it was 22%, and in 2016, it was 20%. So we're getting better. We can pat ourselves on the back. We're moving forward. And at the moment, 24% of countries from Africa can apply for visa on arrival. So, for this forum, we're looking at quick wins. And I come from a sales and marketing perspective. As much as we work on advocacy, sales and marketing is where we're going to change the narrative. And why? Why do we want to change this narrative? Increasing intra-African tourism can change the trend of seasonality. When your tourists aren't here, you can work on filling your bums on beds. Doesn't mean to say that you have to change your marketing, but you can increase it. You can integrate inter-African tourism into everything you do. You can increase your product diversification, which ultimately creates jobs, and that's why we're here. And you can increase your tourism demand and supply chain. And you say, well, why should we do this? At the moment, and let's be real here, tourism is marketed primarily to middle-aged, affluent, North American and Western European markets. If we're going to actually do something from this forum, we need to change what we're selling. It can't be the same old, same old. And I've put in a few ideas there. You have urban, you have the millennial, Generation Y, popular culture, events, niche marketing. And just to give you an idea across the continent, and specifically in Durban, who's hosting this conference, the Durban July is estimated to bring 56,000 people into this city when it takes place. And on average, people are spending up to 6,000 Rand per person to come and attend the Durban July. We heard last week, was it yesterday, the day before, that the ZCC festival in Limpopo around Easter. We talked about a festival in Swaziland. The Bushfire Festival at the moment attracts 20,000 tourists to Swaziland. And if we're looking at sporting events, the Cape Argus is the largest timed cycling event in the world, with 35,000 people attending it. These are big events, but as you attract more millennials, more Generation Y, you realize that it's the experience that drives the travel. It's experience that drives inter-African travel. And when you integrate these policies into your marketing and business plans, it's what you need to think about. What is the next unique African experience? And I think a word when I was doing research on how do we market and sell intra-African tourism to change the way we're doing things, there was a great word, Afro optimism. We need to embrace Afro optimism. We need to think, when we're looking at our marketing structures, that mobile penetration in 2023 will reach, in Africa, just under 1 billion. And of those 1 billion people in 2023, 800 million of them will have mobile broadband subscription. And what does that mean? Social media platforms. And I'm not talking the social media platforms that come from outside the continent. We're looking at user-generated social media platforms. There's some fantastic opportunities. If you look at Tastemakers Africa, Everyday Africa, Hip Africa, they have followings of thousands. You can also look at disruptives. Airbnb put out a statistic that they have 2 million guests in South Africa and 3.5 million guests in Africa, primarily generated by intra-African travel. Yet we also need to understand the market, change the way we market to it. We need to look at social media platforms like Facebook. In Africa alone, Facebook has 177 million users, and Everyday Africa has a large majority of those. So what I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, and what I'm pleading with you, integrate these concepts into what you do, own it, travel within Africa, and work with people who generate the content from inside rather than from outside. Because the only way we're going to move forward as Africa is to move forward together.